Hello, welcome back to Enjoy Parenting, the podcast where we talk about how to get the most out of one of the best values life has to offer, being a parent. I am Kyle Steele. I'm father of two and the head of school at VanDamme Academy. And my co-host is Lisa VanDamme, mother of four, and the founder of VanDamme Academy. Today's episode is titled Meeting Your Parental Waterloo, which is a cryptic title that I'll explain in a minute. But Lisa, you have a story to kind of kick off the topic and how we got here. Oh, and by the way, to our viewers, this is pre-recorded because the arbitrary time change in America is different than the arbitrary time change in the UK. So we're recording this and can't engage live, I'm afraid. No Clubhouse today. But Lisa, start us off with the story that got you onto this topic.
Okay, before we get to the story, I just want to take a moment to say it's a special day. It is St. Patrick's Day, but more important than that, it is what I call St. Kyle's Day.
Yeah.
Happy birthday. I do think you earned sainthood by navigating the school through COVID.
Yeah. So I think I suffered enough.
It will forever be St. Kyle's Day in my mind. Okay, so back to the topic. I laughed at your title because that's the first I heard it, though I knew what the topic was.
All right.
So I'm going to actually ask you to start us off because you have made reference many times to what you call Napoleon Situations, which has to do with the story about Napoleon. So if you would just tell that story real quick, I'll tell you how this came up in my mind in regard to parenting.
Yeah, it's an anecdote. I can't remember where I heard it from. And it's probably one of those legendary stories that isn't remotely true. But the story goes that Napoleon was at some sort of a soiree or a party. And a young officer comes up to him, has had too much wine, and says, all right, so you're the greatest general of all time. If you're the greatest general of all time, what would you do in this situation where, you know, the opponent has the high ground and they have these guns and you have these smaller guns and you're outnumbered in this way and your supply chains are cut off? What would you do, greatest general in the world, in that situation? And Napoleon is purported to have quipped, because I'm the greatest general of all time, I would not find myself in that situation. And so this has become a shorthand. A Napoleon situation is a situation where the only solution is to not be in it in the first place. Or a situation where there is no solution. You just kind of have to retreat and cut your losses. So that's the term that Lisa and I use around the office to describe all manner of things.
Yes. Okay. So here's how this came up in my mind recently. I was at Target with my children and they were looking around at toys. They had some budget that they were eager to spend. And I was listening to a father talking to his son and saying in a very irritated tone of voice, you know, the problem is, every time I buy you a toy, you only want to play with it for a day and then it gets forgotten and then you want the next toy. And it was quite a protracted speech he was giving his son and he sounded very irritated. And I listened to him and thought, oh boy, that this speech makes me uncomfortable. I felt a little bad for the kid on the receiving end of this and also heard myself. Yeah. I mean, I'm certain I've had similar conversations and definitely felt similar frustrations that, you know, as soon as my kids they've exhausted a toy within 24 hours and they're already on to the next thing. And I bought Coco a doll recently that was kind of a big splurge purchase for her. And she brought it in the car the day after we bought it, and it has stayed in the car ever since. And I saw it yesterday and said, don't you want to bring your doll in? And she was like, no. I mean, I think it made it for the ride home. It was a point of interest for the ride home. So anyway, I was thinking about this, you know, my sympathy for the kid in this situation, my identity with the father, and thinking, well, there are preconditions that the reason I feel sympathy for the kid is that there are preconditions to making the child feel this way that mean what he is experiencing is very normal. He's not
Yeah.
a bad kid.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
assault. I mean, we could, I'm sure you have thoughts about it. He's assaulted. My kids are assaulted with advertisements on TV or YouTube videos
Mhm.
all the
Mhm.
time. They have Amazon. I mean, they've grown up with Amazon. I didn't have Amazon when I was a kid. They know. I have a distinct memory of Coco at 2, barely able to talk, pushing the button on the side of my phone and saying, "Siri, get me more horses." She just thought she could push the button on the phone and they'd be
Yeah.
ordered and show up at the door the next day, which is not far from the truth. So
Like a genie in a magic lamp, that's the level of satisfaction that they have.
yeah.
Instant satisfaction. Yeah.
So that's the Napoleon situation to me, is that there are conditions that
Mhm.
are priming them to have these ever increasing desires and to know how readily those could be satisfied if only the adults in their lives would indulge it. And I don't have a solution off the top of my head of how to change the circumstances of to change that scenario, to change those preconditions. But I do have the sense that the solution is not to be angry with them that
Yeah.
they have that feeling.
Yeah.
That can't be the way that it's dealt with.
Yeah.
So
Like, to continue our military metaphor, that father was choosing as his battleground his child's desire for new toys,
yeah,
which is a really crappy battleground to pick.
yeah, yeah,
All the sympathy in the world for the father, and his frustration is entirely valid, but to choose, I'm going to now try to argue or convince or just vent my frustration at my child about his desire for toys that are carefully advertised to him, with all of the psychological science that Western civilization can muster.
yeah,
That's not the right place to choose for that battleground. Now, the question is, what do you do instead, which is a much harder thing. Grace and I, we are fortunate to only have a 2-year-old. So we haven't faced too much of this yet, but we've already, like, from day one, we've kind of minimized the amount of advertisements that we have. We don't have our TV is actually in our garage, so it's quite an ordeal to go down and watch TV. And when we do, we don't have any advertisements because we've paid for whatever it takes to get the advertisements out of there. And we've stopped. We don't really go to toy stores unless it's really very specific. And we're careful when we go to, like, I don't even take him to Target because I know that we'll cross paths with the toy store. Sadly, we don't. It's hard to take him to Barnes and Noble now. Like, Barnes and Noble is mostly a toy store at this point. So to some extent, we're choosing the Amish route of just cutting ourselves off from too much marketing, because I just don't know if he's ready to. I don't want to get, like, on a crazy rant here, but it just doesn't seem like it's healthy for him. He's not equipped to handle that amount of marketing. So that's one strategy that we have. We might just be trying to push back the tides, and it may crumble on us eventually, but that's what we're trying so far.
Yeah. Yeah. So it seems like the advice, and we could talk about other Napoleon situations. I've got some others in mind, but it seems like there are kind of two angles to take on the situation that we can think about. One is, well, how do you redress the situation itself? Like, what is how do you avoid advertisements? Do you avoid Target? Do you avoid the scenarios that will feed this increasing desire? That's one issue. And then the other is, how do you deal with the fact of that situation already having been established? And that's the one that I feel like I have to be more careful with. I do want to think about how to help my kids find more enduring enjoyment from their toys, and to minimize that kind of addictive. I mean, it really is an addictive feeling of needing to be on to the next one. So I do want to think about those, but I also mostly just want to be careful that I'm not angry with them for a desire that naturally springs from a situation that I've allowed to happen.
Yeah.
And I just, as a universal policy, want to be alert to these situations where it's not their fault
Mhm.
that they're behaving in a way that I find unpleasant.
Mhm. Mhm.
I've allowed a circumstance to exist
Yeah.
that's going to naturally lead to that
Yeah.
behavior. And it doesn't mean that the behavior itself can't be addressed. I still could sit them down and have a conversation about, limiting what limiting their desires for toys, or trying to get the most out of the things they have, or feeling gratitude for
Mhm.
what they've already been given. We could talk about those things, but I don't want to talk about it in that tone that I heard from the dad and have heard in myself, where it's condescension and anger, as if they should know better,
Yeah.
when really they should. I have no reason to expect that of
I,
them.
I have a question about the original scenario, and I don't know if you're witness to this or not, but was this in response to the child getting like fussy and whiny and difficult because he was unsatisfied, or did you just see the snippet?
I only heard the father's reaction. I didn't hear what prompted it.
Yeah. Well, in my head, as you were describing it, I imagine this is a response to the child, whining and really wanting something.
Yeah.
And this made me think of a tactic that one could use in that situation, that, um, you know, you see those tears and you see that unhappiness and you see it as something that needs to be addressed. Like you need to fix it so that it goes away. And your options seem to be, explain why he shouldn't have those feelings, or gratify him so that those feelings go away. But there's plenty of times as a parent where you just accept the fact that your kid's going to be unhappy. Like, we take them to get shots at the doctor, they're going to be unhappy about that. They have to, I don't know, try on clothes. That's something I hated as a kid. I wanted to run away from home every time I had to try on clothes. And it might just be like, yeah, we're going to go to Target, they're going to see the toy section and they're going to complain, and it's okay. It can be beneficial for them to learn to cope with some disappointment. So that's one tool in the arsenal, is rather than seeing as like, I need to maintain this equilibrium of emotion, and reacting when it goes down, just accepting it.
Yeah.
I don't know, but
That's
you're much more
no,
experienced than I am. I don't know how that sounds, if that sounds wise or naive.
well, that sounds connected to your very helpful principle of my child's emotion is not an action item.
Yeah.
And that the fact that they're upset doesn't mean something needs to be done. It doesn't mean I need to make them not upset. I can just let them sit with their unhappy feelings for a bit. One of the things that's interesting to me that I don't know that we can answer right now is it just biological? Is it just primal that we feel like we need to fix those feelings, or is it cultural? Has that always been true? I don't know, because it does. I kind of need to summon your words as a mantra in my mind. When I encounter those situations, I need to make a purpose of consciously doing that, because it's something I feel through my whole body. And I know I'm not alone, that a child whining is experienced as physical, as something that I need to fix it. Like I need it to go away so that the thing inside of me goes away. So that's just an interesting challenge.
Yeah, you bring that up, that question, and it just makes me wish I could, leave my job and become an anthropologist and spend time with tribes around the world. And I'm sure that there's also just different temperaments that are more sensitive to, there's some people that it's kind of their personality is, I want to make sure that there's a stable emotional state around me, and there might be some societies that reward that. And maybe all those people move to Orange County because they have that personality. So it is an interesting question. It certainly seems like for the toddler years and the infant years, it would be biological, because what else, like you have to maintain equilibrium to keep the child alive. But I don't know if I feel like once they get older, it's a natural progression for the parent to become comfortable with the fact that they have feelings and not treat those as action items. But a lot of parents don't develop past that for very understandable reasons. There's no signals for that they need to move beyond that.
So at the risk of this becoming a little therapy session, I just really like this topic, and I'd like to come away with some things in my toolkit for it. Okay. So in another trip to Target seems to be a real hazard for parenting hazard. And another trip to Target, my kids I had picked them up from school kind of late. They stayed for after school care. I think with the time change, they were both that compounded the situation. They were both really exhausted. And when they're tired, I mean, they bicker a lot and they like to get under each other's skin, but they were really not at each other's throats is too strong, because it's always at this low level bickering and whining and harassing that really gets under my skin. So they were in this mood and really harassing each other. And in that moment, I did just what you said. Mm-hmm. I thought to myself, okay, they can harass each other. They can be annoyed with each other. I'm not going to intervene. I'm not going to tell them to stop. I'm not going to do anything. And they pretty much bickered the whole way home. But there was a serenity in me that I don't usually have, because I had specifically resolved, I'm not going to intervene. I'm not going to make this an action item. I'm not going to try to stop this. And it didn't have the same emotion. It didn't take the same emotional toll on me that it ordinarily would. So I'd just like to hear thoughts you have or formulations you might have of what is a way to think about that situation that will help, preserve your serenity and not make you dependent on fixing it.
Well, it'll preserve your serenity, and it will keep you from wasting your time and energy, because if you tried to intervene into that conflict, it was not going to do very much. No, or at least I think you'd acknowledge that you didn't have a good opportunity to help them grow and mature there. One thing that it puts me in mind of is something that I observed a lot at recess, which is there would be kids that would have conflict with each other, and the parents would want us to just not let those kids play with each other. And the parents would be pulling out their hair, like, why do you keep going back to play with Jimmy? Every time you play with him, you get into a fight. And what we knew at recess is, like, he's going to keep going back to Jimmy until he works out whatever it is he needs to work out with Jimmy. There's something about Jimmy that he needs to solve. He needs to figure out, how do I handle it when he insults me? And I haven't solved that yet. And he's going to feel unease and be drawn like a moth to a flame. And, your Coco and Seth might be bickering with each other because there's just something they haven't figured out about how to relate to each other. And they don't know what it is. We don't know what it is, but they're going to keep going at this until they figure it out. And so some wisdom I gained as a recess supervisor is that sometimes you got to let the kids go at each other a little bit, not like they're, slugging each other in the face. But they get into conflict, they get some hurt feelings. And then once that's kind of been drawn to a sharper point, then you have a good opportunity to help them talk through a situation and they can grow a little bit from it. So that's one thing, is that just to see those, for me with Isaac right now, he can't handle disappointment. When he's disappointed about something, the world is ending. And I want to try to resolve that feeling, but no, I just need to let him experience disappointment, and then somehow I'll be able to help him cope with disappointment rather than removing the cause of his disappointment. And so letting them experience these negative feelings as a part of their growth is a helpful tool. Another thing that it's thought that I have is that this is why we have teachers and coaches, because it's often a lot easier. It's kind of like how you have a celebrity has an agent to negotiate for them so that they don't have to be a jerk. I think that parents need teachers and coaches that can be tough for them, because they're less emotionally invested. The coach can tell them, no, get up, do some push-ups. You're part of the team. And that's a lot harder for a parent to do. So there's a few thoughts. I don't know if any of them seem like they're hitting home for you.
They do, absolutely. And it's funny because it relates. I had another topic in mind that I thought of as entirely separate, but now they're just completely coming together, which was, I didn't know what term to use for it. And you can probably come up with the better term, but being cautious against getting emotionally hijacked by the child. So that's
Mm.
part of that is my child's emotion is not an action item, but another part of it is and I guess this is just kind of a form of codependency, but my child's emotion doesn't mean I need to be feeling that emotion. It's really easy if your child is very upset to just take on that feeling yourself. And that's what makes you feel like it needs to be resolved
Yeah.
immediately. And so I'll tell you the situation that this was related to, and we can see how these things are connected.
Mm.
So this is one where I was actually proud of the way I handled it. I sound surprised, but sometimes it's really hard. So my Coco has a very, very good friend. I mean, like the best of friends. And they have an especially affectionate relationship. Like when they see each other, they throw their arms around each other and they don't want to let go. And when they have to separate, it's the same thing. I'll have to actually physically pry them apart. It's that very, sweet, affectionate kind of dynamic between them. And when I picked Coco up after school care yesterday, she said that this friend was mean to her.
Mhm.
And she said it in a tone that was very distressing for her, because I could tell this is the first time they'd really had a conflict. They just kind of are like two peas in a pod, and everything flows naturally and easily for them, which is not true with all her friends. So the fact of them having a conflict seemed like it kind of rocked her world.
Mhm.
And in that moment, and she again, there was like projecting distress, and I could have taken that distress on myself. But instead, in that moment, I just said, yeah, friendships there's always bumps in the road in friendships. There are times that you're not quite going to see eye to eye, even though you do most of the time, but don't worry, you'll work it out or something.
Mhm.
But I was projecting that this is a normal thing to happen.
Yeah.
It's not something to be distressed about. To give her confidence that it's something that could be worked through. And part of the impulse there was I wanted to make sure her description of it was she was being mean, and that's how she was experiencing it. But when I heard a little more about it, it was clear it wasn't that she's being mean. It was just a butting heads that they needed to resolve. So I also wanted to make sure that narrative, without contesting it directly, I was kind of shifting the narrative, like not she's mean, but we had a misunderstanding, sort of.
Yeah. So can I?
She calmed down very quickly in that scenario. If I had taken on her emotion, and I know a lot of parents have a tendency to do this, and questioned her about it, and mirrored her anger toward her friend at all, I think things would have just escalated, and it would have been much harder for her to manage.
Yeah. And so what you're doing here is you're not picking the wrong battleground where you're like, my child has this feeling, I need to resolve this feeling, or my child has this problem, I will accept the problem on my child's terms and try to solve it on those terms.
Right.
Instead, you're able to emotionally step back because you're saying to yourself, okay, this is a normal thing that happens. My child can have conflict with other children, and that will be okay. You by stepping back, you can let it resolve and mature, and then it gets drawn to that point where it is a good battleground, to keep using my military metaphor, and then you can give more appropriate advice to them. So letting the child work through their feelings, instead of taking on those feelings or combating those feelings, you can find a better opportunity to be helpful for them.
Okay, so that can be one of my takeaways, is what is the battleground here?
Yeah.
So with the situation with the boy and his father at Target, the battleground the father picked, I don't know how to describe it exactly, but it's like, my kid's being a brat, he's being greedy.
His child's desires were the battleground. Yeah.
His child's desires. So stepping back and asking yourself, actually, what is the battleground here, will help you not just react in the moment that's going to exacerbate the situation.
Yeah, and this is all, it happens pretty naturally if you are a devotee of Hayam Ganat, that he teaches you how to listen and not take on emotions of your child and let them express things. And then when you do that, you'll find that the actual point of contention is not what it appears to be at first. And then you can be much more effective in that way.
So I've always known that advice of how I'm gonna, but it's a bit of a twist on it.
Yeah.
You may say that explicitly, but you're just giving your child and yourself space to figure out what the actual issue is.
Yeah.
Not just because I always thought of it as time for emotional recovery, and that the emotional recovery would mean they're able to think more clearly. But I still thought of it more as, okay, mirror their emotions, give them time to recover, don't fight with their feelings in the moment, and then they'll be able to think more clearly about, but then the question is about what?
Yeah.
And that's the new angle here that I find helpful is be careful you're clear what you need to be thinking about.
Yeah. So we're getting close to the end of our time. Actually, I didn't keep track of the time. We might be wildly over. But I want to try to kind of summarize this because we've moved around to a few different things. We started with this idea that recognizing a Napoleon situation, which is the point is, don't fight on that battleground. Don't make that the point of contention because you're not going to win. Everything's stacked against you. And what's better is to have a sort of a retreat from it where you accept that the child is going to be unhappy about something, or you accept that they're not going to behave very well for a while. And then
can I just add one more element in there? Because part of it that's important to me is that makes it the Napoleon situation is accept your responsibility in creating your child's reaction in that moment. Be careful that you are conscious that the way they're responding is not bratty behavior, it's normal, natural behavior given the context that's been established. And that will change how you relate to them in a way that's more kind and appropriate. Because you're not treating them as unfairly as an adversary. You're recognizing, no, I created this situation and now I just need to figure out how to work with it.
Yeah. And so when you step back from the situation, you kind of don't take the bait of addressing the problem on the child's terms or battling them over their feelings and desires. You can let kind of let the situation mature and develop, and it can often come to a point where you can actually make more meaningful intervention. So like if we kind of rewrite the situation with this dad and Target, I'm kind of doing this on the spot. We could imagine him saying like, yeah, I know you want a lot of these things. I really wish that we could buy all of them. We don't have any money to buy new toys right now. Maybe you can put it on a Christmas list and then just listen to the kids say, I know I really want this now. I saw this. And then he starts to say like, Jimmy was making fun of me because I don't have as many toys as he does. And by letting the child, talk through it, and you might find a better opportunity to address things. Now, it might also just happen that the only solution is get out of Target and don't take your kids to the toy department so much unless you're ready to spend things. And it's also possible that you're in a crappy situation because you weren't really thinking ahead. But that's another topic for another day.
And also just that there are cultural forces like the omnipresence of Amazon packages, which are wonderful. It just makes it introduces a new parenting challenge that you just have to figure out how to navigate.
Like I have my own little Napoleon situation that I wanted to bring up, and that is slightly different than what we've been different in emphasis. It was this past Monday. Grace and I had just gotten back from work and from exercising, so we were tired. Edith needed our attention. Isaac was not getting enough attention, so he decided to do whatever it takes to get attention, and that involved, hitting his sister. So Grace had to leave the room. And then when I was not stimulating him enough, he was just taking his Legos and hurling them all over the apartment, laughing his head up. And I was tired. I was miserable. And I thought, well, what's this? How do if I make the battleground throwing Legos, and try to stop him from throwing Legos, my only real options are just to like cudgel him into not doing that, you know, like
Mhm.
take the Legos away or scold and berate him. And he's too young to understand any of that. And I just said to myself, I need to just go someplace where he can throw things. So I took him outside and he cried about that. He said he wanted to stay home. We went down to this grassy area in our neighborhood and we just started throwing pine cones around and he had a wonderful time. And for me, this is an example of a Napoleon situation because I set myself up for disaster. I was not thinking proactively. I was just kind of reactive from moment to moment. And I found myself in a situation where, because I wasn't thinking about whatever Isaac's needs might be when I get home, he was meeting his needs in the best way he could find, which was not that pleasant for me. And once I shifted and said, all right, I'm going to be proactive. I'm going to ignore the fact that he's screaming his head off while we go outside. We went outside and we had a wonderful time. I chased him around on the grass. We threw a bunch of pine cones. We made a big pile of sticks. We sat on our backs and looked at the clouds, and it was wonderful. And so that's my own. That's another way is just to say the situation's terrible, not because of my kid, but because of my bad planning. And I didn't, as you always say, you need to make room for your child's needs, or for the child's to do things slowly or to have a difficult time.
And if you can't, I mean, if you didn't have the time or the energy to devote to him so beautifully as you did, which is going to happen sometimes, then it can just be having patience and kind acceptance of the child's reaction. You can set limits, but it's that impulse to judge your kid as a brat because of the way they're behaving that seems like the theme of the Napoleon situation.
So hopefully, gentle viewers, this has been a useful idea of a Napoleon situation, that don't fight. If you find yourself on a crappy battleground, don't fight there. Instead, find a way to get out of that battleground. It might hurt, but have a tactical retreat. Come back for more parenting. What's that?
You now can go to the cafe for a catered lunch and birthday cake.
That's really sweet. Thank you. All right. Well, thanks everyone. Come back for more parenting advice and military metaphors. Enjoy parenting. Happy fighting. Happy battles. Bye.
Happy birthday. Bye.